All right, welcome back, everyone. We will start, and those who are joining a little bit later can catch up. It looks like we have 28 participants. I did upload a PDF version of this slide deck to the resources on Sakai for those of you who would like to follow along or annotate. And again, we are recording these sessions, so if you do have to deck out for whatever reason, we will send it out later with the emailed survey. And today we will be covering the topic, understanding users amidst social distancing, how to empathize before problem solving. And for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Liz. I serve as the design thinking lead at Innovate Carolina. So some intro and announcements. Again, my name is Liz. I have a dual appointment within the School of Public Health as an assistant professor in the Department of Health Behavior. And then I also spend a lot of time with faculty across campus, building and integrating design thinking skills and learnings into research, teaching, and practice projects. To review the Innovate Now faculty workshop series that we're currently offering via Zoom, will build faculty knowledge and skills in design thinking, foster community across faculty across campus who you might not interact with otherwise, and then also connect faculty with innovation and entrepreneurship experts and resources here at UNC. And one of the more explicit ways we're doing that is offering you all office hours with Innovate Carolina experts. And so if you haven't had a chance to review the different bios and sign up for office hours for this week or next week, I do really encourage you to go back to that initial email with information so that you can see if you would like to do that in the next 2 weeks. And then for today's workshop specifically, titled Understanding Users Amid Social Distancing, again, how to empathize before problem solving, we will discuss the importance of deeply understanding users before and throughout the problem solving process. Again, provide concrete strategies for you to get to know your users virtually, and then continue to facilitate individual reflection. Many of you started this, about 15 to 20 of you actually completed the pre-work on Sakai prior to today, and it was really great to be able to read through your own personal reflections about your cognitive biases and how you might start to be able to mitigate them. Again, part of this journey now into the fall innovation workshop is for us to learn more about ourselves so that we can do better work in teams and also lead teams. So a few announcements also coming out of the survey. We heard from many of you that you would like us to set the norm that we turn videos on if possible, especially for any small group breakout room activities that we will engage in today. We also heard that it worked really well for some of you who are more introverted, that you like being able to type into the chat versus unmuting yourself to participate. And so we're going to encourage both modes of participation again today. And at this point, we're going to start with a quick warm-up that again helps you reflect on your own positionality, intersectionality, and role as you show up for work every day. And so we call this one 7 lenses. So for the next 2 to 3 minutes, we want you to individually write down 7 potential lenses through which you see the world. We're defining a lens as an attribute or identity you relate to. It may be your gender, religion, education, nationality, etc. Reflect on how each of these shapes your personal perspective of the world and how you approach your work. So again, I'm going to first set a 2 to 3 minute timer. This is entirely individual. And so we will do it individually, and then I will break you out into some smaller groups so that you can actually meet and discuss with some of the other participants here today. One more minute. All right, so momentarily, I'm going to split you up into small breakout rooms. Again, one of the explicit goals of these workshops is to foster community and for you to build relationships across campus. And so I'm going to randomly assign you into these small groups of 3 to 4. And in these small groups, it would be great if you could introduce your first name, the department or school that you come from, and then a description of one or more of your lenses or a reflection of how easy or hard this activity was for you. And so again, first name, department and school, a description of one or more of your lenses, or a reflection of how easy or hard this was for you. And each of you will have about 2 minutes to share in small groups. I'll program it for about 8 minutes that you all are away before coming back to the whole group. So I'm going to go ahead and move you into rooms. All right, ready, set, go. All right, it looks like many of you are back. We'll give folks another 30 seconds to join. As you're coming back to the whole group, it would be great if we could have a few folks volunteer answers to the following questions, either through unmuting themselves or through typing into the chat. So the questions are, how might this activity be helpful as we build and manage teams? And how might this activity be helpful as we engage with users to understand before problem solving?
I can go. I just thought it was a really nice icebreaker to talk to two people I've never spoken with before. And so I think we really, in a short amount of time, learned some really interesting things about each other that this helped facilitate, even where we grew up and sort of what part of our identity drives our research and our practice.
Thanks so much, Heather. Other thoughts?
So this is Leslie Davis. It was as helpful taking a moment to list as it was speaking about it, hearing it, and then sort of revising your list of things you hadn't thought about. Oh, I'm an educator too, and it really does inform much. I don't know what you mean by the second bullet, so I was just going to take you to the end users of whatever your innovation is, or
Yes, whatever product or service that you are hoping to develop with future work.
Okay, yeah, ask the member of the, I have to think on that one.
Great. I see some other notes, people saying that they loved meeting the people they were in breakout rooms with. It's a good icebreaker, and asking some nondescript questions gives insights into biases, finding unknown expertise that might be of value. Any last thoughts before we move on? Learn just as much about myself as with others, other members in the small group. I was glad to be actively engaged with others directly and helped think through the issue. Wonderful. Okay, so you will be continuing to work in small breakout groups today. So for the rest of our time together, our agenda is to first present an overview of design thinking. So what is it? Two, I will present a case study of my own work with our nonprofit. Three, discuss finding and contacting users, especially right now when many of us are social distancing. Four, to review some potential virtual inspiration methods that you can incorporate into your own teaching, research, and practice. And then rounding it out with Q&A like we did last time. So, what is design thinking? There are many definitions of design thinking. One of the simplest ones that I gravitate towards is the one put forth by IDEO.org. So design thinking is a human-centered approach to problem solving and innovation. And it's many things. So first, it's a set of mindsets. And so many times we gravitate towards methods and tools because they're concrete and don't spend enough time on the mindsets, but this is something that we will focus on as we move into the fall workshop, and making sure that we are explicitly talking about and building mindsets in addition to giving you tools to act. The second, as a method and a process. And then third, design thinking is a set of tools and activities. And the picture here of ice cream is to remind me to make sure that we're making it clear that there are different flavors of design thinking. And so you might be exposed to the version of design thinking that Stanford's D School has put forth, or a version that MIT has, or other for-profit and nonprofit companies. What's important for this set of workshops is that we look at the big picture, and it's not necessarily how many steps does each of these methods offer, but that the core principles are the same across all of them. And we've chosen to focus on one version of design thinking just so it's easier for us to make sure we're on the same page. And again, that version is the IDEO version. And so what does design thinking do? I really love this graphic because it shows that design thinking explicitly guides us in thinking about these three areas. And so the first is desirability. So what do people that we are working with, whether it be patients or community members or students, what do they want and what do they need? And making sure that we are explicitly looking to gather this information and take it into account into any sort of problem solving that we do. And in addition to that, the next piece is feasibility. And so making sure that within the budget, time constraints, or technology available, that whatever solutions we are envisioning and trying can actually happen in the real world. And then lastly, the viability of this potential problem-solving approach. It's really important to not only consider how will we fund it immediately with seed funding or grant funding, but how viable is this idea beyond initial funding so that it can stand on its own two legs in the real world. And from my own personal perspective, I think that my training has done a really good job outside of design thinking and public health world, thinking about desirability and feasibility to a certain extent. It's very infrequent that a lot of the grant mechanisms that I apply for actually push us to think about that viability piece and like how will it sustain itself after this particular grant runs out. And so I really appreciate that design thinking focuses on all three of these aspects and looking for innovation at that sweet spot where all three of these things intersect. And so one of the questions I get a lot is, where did it evolve from? What you're telling me doesn't seem brand spanking new. And so want to make it very clear here that a lot of the different versions of design thinking coming from IDEO, Frog, or the D School at Stanford is not brand new. And often many of the foundational principles come from other disciplines and fields like computer science, visual design, architecture, and business. So what are some of the things or products that have been created with design thinking? And so we put together a list of some of the more popular items that you might remember or use. So Palm Pilots way back when, before we had other things like smartphones, Oral-B electric toothbrushes, Apple's first version of the computer mouse, and then Fitbits. In addition to creating tangible products, design thinking is also great for creating services and interventions. And so some of the examples that we can share here, and I've linked in the case study below, and so I will also send the links out with the PowerPoint version of this slide deck. But Bank of America actually partnered with IDEO.org a while back to create some sort of solution to help their customers save more. They noticed that many of their customers had checking accounts, but not savings accounts. And so through a lot of design thinking work, they created the Keep the Change campaign, where every debit card purchase was rounded up to the nearest dollar, and that difference was deposited into a savings account. So passively saving for customers, and it was very popular. Also with LA County in the 2016 election, IDEO worked to help reimagine what voting would look like at the polls, knowing that LA had hundreds of different languages spoken by people who were expected to vote with a variety of different physical needs. And so here's a snapshot of one of their prototyped voting stalls. And then lastly, other products like ones that we might use on a regular basis that have been designed with design thinking include Spotify. So again, we wanted to hit on some of the mindsets that design thinking explicitly builds. And many of these mindsets might not be new to you, and you might feel like you're really good at some of these. I know that I am still on a journey to strengthen many of these mindsets myself, and it takes active practice and then a lot of accountability for others to make sure that I'm actually trying to do this. And so one, creative confidence. So underscoring the idea that creativity is not something that's innate or that you're born with, and it's something that you can build and practice over time to increase your confidence. Second, many of us, because of the way we are trained and the work that we do, might think through problems in our heads and then arrive on one idea to then test in the real world. But we really want to emphasize for design thinking that we need to make things in the real world more often and get feedback very quickly instead of just theorizing all the time. 3, learn from failure. In order for us to really meet the needs and create products and services that are desirable, feasible, and viable, we will need to fail in order to learn quickly to advance. 4, empathy is really important as we work with patients and community members and students. It's not just starting at the problem level and moving forward. We really need to understand our users as people so that we can further get to that desirability piece and do some of that homework ourselves. 5, embrace ambiguity. This is tough for many of us who have to write grants and say what we're doing up front, but it is entirely possible that we do not know what the solutions are at the beginning of a 5-year grant cycle. And it's important that we acknowledge that we might change the solution that we've penned. 6, optimism. Design thinking is inherently optimistic, so we like to frame questions as how might we opportunities? And so that's something small that you can start doing even now that assumes that there's a solution out there. And then number 7, iterate, iterate, iterate. So instead of putting all of your eggs in one basket and one pilot study that you will then scale up if that one intervention works, think about levels and just different rounds of iteration that need to happen very quickly so that you can continue learning and making it better incrementally so that by the time you get to the product or service, you've gone through so many rounds, you're so confident that it's desirable, viable, and feasible. Okay, quick overview of the process, and I know that this graphic does a great job making it look very simple and neat from left to right. So at the most basic level, IDEO's version of design thinking chunks the process into 3 phases. And so the first phase is what we're focusing on today. It's inspiration and a lot of divergent thinking. So opening ourselves up to questions, learning as much as we can about the potential users, patients, families, stakeholders before we do any acting. So this is us being sponges and intentionally learning about our users, followed by ideation, which will be next Monday session. So after you've learned a lot about the people and the context, there are processes in place and methods that we can use to guide us through what are the wild possibilities and how do we make decisions about what we want to move forward and test with. And then lastly, implementation, which will be next Wednesday, thinking through, great, now I have some of these ideas. If I only have a couple days or weeks and a limited budget of a couple $100, how do I structure experiments that I can gather meaningful data that will inform future iterations of products and services? And again, it looks very neat going left to right now, but it is entirely possible that you'll start at inspiration, head to ideation, something from ideation prompts you to go back. And so it is not always one phase after another. It is entirely possible that you will go back and forth throughout your process. And then lastly, design thinking is a set of tools. And in the resource section of Sakai, we've uploaded the field guide to human-centered design, which is IDEO.org's free design kit. And so it goes over the mindsets, it goes over the overall process, and then it dives deep and then specifies actual methods for each of those steps and describes for the photo journal, what are the materials you will need, how much time will you need, and what are the instructions to complete this activity. And so the homework coming out of this session will ask you to visit the online guide or the PDF to pick out some inspiration activities that you will try on your own. But for those of you who really like concrete instructions like I do, this was very, very helpful. And then some additional context before we sum it all up, design thinking versus traditional problem solving. So I came across this graphic from Melissa Carrier, who was on this call as well, and loved it because I think it does do a great job showing how some of us might operate typically and how design thinking is a little bit different. So on the left-hand side, it's very common for many of us to be presented with problems, one or more of them, and then we take those problems and the information presented to us and we derive a solution from it. I do it constantly. In design thinking, you might be presented with those three initial problems that are those three black circles that are colored in, but instead of taking that at face value and moving forward, we have explicit steps to pause here and actually go backwards and to further understand the people and the context first, which might unearth new problems that are related to the ones that we started with, which will then generate different solutions than we would have if you had just started with the problem and move forward. And so this is something that I will continue to reference and is helpful for me. And I hope that it's a helpful visual representation for you. And today's focus really is on this understanding, empathizing, inspiring piece. So why do we want our faculty at UNC to build design thinking skills? Well, we want our faculty to develop deep understanding of the problems that they're being asked to solve and focus on genuine human needs. We want faculty to create space and time to explore multiple options before converging on one. We want faculty to place small bets quickly through experimentation, through using a prototyping approach. And we really want to emphasize collaboration and intentional diversity in the work that you do in designing teams and engaging with users. So at this point, I want to hear from you all. We are going to also demo some technology that might be helpful for you as you teach and or collaborate with teams virtually. And so I've set up a Google Jamboard, and you're going to access board 1 of 10 and share your thoughts on a Post-it note. And so I am going to switch my share screen to the Jamboard and paste the link below so that you all have it, and then demo it very quickly. Great, so I've just chatted the actual link, and then we'll get there myself. And so once you get there on your own screen and not in my shared screen, you'll see that there is a menu of options on the left. You have the ability to click on the one that looks like a sticky note, to type something, hit save, and then if you want to move the sticky note, you will have to go back to the arrow, which is select, and then move it. But at this point, it would be great if each of you could go through and answer the question, what about design thinking excites you the most? So again, I will put that into the chat so that you have access to that question. But it would be great if each of you could spend a minute or two answering the question, what about design thinking excites you the most?
I don't have the ability to post.
Seems like you might not be the only one. Let me see.
You have to sign into the Google accounts and all that to be able to use it.
Well, for mine, it says that there are currently too many people viewing this file. Please try again later.
Got it. Let me first try giving everyone editor permissions, which I thought I had done earlier. My apologies. So for those of you who can try this again, let's see if you can get edit access. And then for those of you who don't have Gmail accounts, my understanding is that you should be able to still edit without one. Okay. Kelly and Catherine say that now it seems to be working.
Yes, it's.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so can you see the got it, Liz note here? All right, so if each of you could just spend a minute or two reflecting on the question, what about design thinking excites you the most so far based on what you've heard? All right, one more minute for folks to type in their initial thoughts. Curious for the person who wrote, "This is so cool." I'm not sure what the this is referencing, so feel free to unmute yourself or to further explain in that sticky.
I want to know what anonymous animal I am. I don't know if I'm a skunk or the raccoon.
All right, take another, the Google Jamboard is so cool. Thank you. All right, another 15 seconds. And then what I'm gonna do is push you back out to the same breakout rooms that you were in earlier. So you can spend about 3 minutes to a minute each just sharing what you wrote. And so again, you can keep writing if you haven't finished, but I am gonna open these rooms back up and then have you come back in 3 minutes. Okay, it looks like a couple of you are back. Okay, looks like more and more people are coming back from breakout rooms. And so we are going to transition into the next piece of content, which is an inspiration case study from my own work, where my team was asked to create some sort of challenge for ourselves that focused on teen pregnancy. And the question that we chose to guide our work was as follows: how might we increase access to high quality comprehensive sexual health education to teens ages 13 to 15 across the country? And so for this particular grant mechanism, we were expected to go through IDEO's design thinking training and then apply the methods in our intervention development. And so I am going to first talk about the initial idea that we had. So I'm a former high school teacher, as was one of the co-Is on this particular project, and went into this particular project thinking, oh, like I just taught high school biology and chemistry and mentored many students and had lots of conversations about sexual health. I feel very equipped to going through and answering this question and creating a solution. And so in the initial stages, we were asked, like, if you had to commit to an idea today, what would it be? And given the information, again, going through this, taking what we saw was the problem and just going forward into a solution, our team was like, we have this. It's going to be a sex ed mobile app for schools, and it's going to include lots of facts and stats, tests and quizzes. It'll be interactive, and then it'll include Q&A. And so we know that a lot of teachers have experience with technology like Kahoot, so a polling software. We were like, this is going to be great for teachers, going to be great for students, and it was helpful to commit to what we thought our initial idea might be before we started this entire process. And so moving forward, I'm going to use this particular project in trying to increase access to comprehensive sex ed for teens 13 to 15 across the US as the case study for discussing IDEO's inspiration phase and overview. And so the purpose of the entire first phase is to learn directly from the people you're designing with and for, and you immerse yourself entirely in their lives in order to deeply understand their needs. And so one of the methods that we chose to use was something called extremes and mainstreams. And we'll come back to this a little bit later as you all get a chance to work on this on your own. The whole thinking behind extremes and mainstreams is that an idea that suits extreme users will nearly certainly work for the majority of others. And so this might be different for those of us who often take a population approach to work, where we spend our time trying to move and change behaviors of those in the middle to shift the risk curve a little bit. And so this was harder for me, but it was helpful for us to think through who are our typical users, what do they usually think, say, and do, and who are our extreme users and who do they think, say, and do. And for our particular project, when we were talking to teens 13 to 15 about sexual health topics, we were expected to think about different aspects of behaviors and mindsets. And so for our extremes, we were looking at teens who had self-reported that they were in multiple romantic relationships versus teens who had no interest in dating and had never been in a romantic relationship. We were interested in talking with teens who had multiple social media accounts and were constantly plugged in, as well as teens who did not own a smartphone or use a smartphone regularly. We were looking at teens who considered themselves to be very religious and teens who considered themselves to be not very religious, and a variety of other different aspects of difference. And so it was really important for us to work with our community partners to identify users, in this case, teens ages 13 to 15, who would fall under some of these definitions of extreme for us so that we could understand their perspectives as we move forward. And I made a note here to note that the Division of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy here at the School of Medicine at UNC has been considering integrating design thinking into their training for their occupational therapy programs. And knowing that even when they look at UNC buildings, many of them are not built with individuals with disabilities in mind, and that is very frustrating for their faculty and students. And so they've organically come to this realization that extremes and mainstreams in design thinking might be something that they want to explicitly teach to their students, emphasizing that it's beneficial generally for us to consider the extremes, and in this case, individuals with disabilities, as we plan curricula, as we figure out which classrooms we offer these courses. And so, again, we'll talk about this more, but this led us to talk to a very diverse group of 13 to 15-year-olds in a variety of different cities. The second method was card sorts. We know that we were engaging with teens, and especially if it was our first time meeting them, it's tough in an interview setting for them to really get comfortable with us very quickly and for them to think on their feet sometimes, especially with sensitive topics that are slightly taboo. And so we really leaned on activities like card sorts, which many of you might have used before. And you can use it with words, you can use it with pictures, but we asked teens a lot of different questions about who would you feel comfortable approaching if you had questions about sex and relationships? Where are the spaces that you would feel most comfortable engaging in these conversations? Which of these topics is most interesting to you? And we would ask our teens to rank, sort, add to the list, or explain based on how they moved these particular cards. And again, this is a really easy activity. And then there's manipulatives for them to touch, and it's less cognitively burdensome for them because they won't have to always think and offer potential answers. And so this was something that we found a lot of success in with using card sorts with teens. And then the third one that I'll highlight today, as we were getting to know our teen users, was analogous inspiration. So analogous inspiration can help you isolate elements of an experience, interaction, or product, and then apply them to whatever design challenge you're working on. So at the most basic level, what is it that you want your users to do? And in what other contexts do users already do this? Similarly, how do you want users to feel or not feel? And in what other contexts do they feel this? So for the first one, we wanted users to be able to guide themselves through whatever product or experience we created. So we didn't want them to have an adult or anybody else stand there and tell them what to do. And so we ended up spending time in the first picture on the left at a hands-on science museum for kids ages 5 to 18. And it was a helpful experience because we could see what people did, teens did, kids did when they first approached an exhibit or activity. And it generated a lot of questions that we wanted to ask our young people as we were continuing to learn about their experiences. And then in terms of how we wanted them to feel, we wanted our young people to feel safe and welcomed. And we had heard from teens in El Paso, Texas, which is where one of our sites was, that a place that did not do a good job of that was a local juvenile detention center. And so one of my co-Is also went to that particular space to observe, and then it led to a bunch of different other questions that we wanted to ask. But this is a great way for you to distill down your research project, your teaching, to what do you want your users to do at the most basic level, and think outside the box. What other contexts are people already doing this or feeling this? And putting yourself in those experiences so that you can gather more inspiration and insights and come up with more questions to answer. So at the end of about 6 months of inspiration, and we did truly use 6 months of time to deeply understand the context and our teens ages 13 to 15, it became very clear to us that schools were not the preferred place to learn about sex and relationships. So our original plan to go through schools to offer a sex ed app didn't seem great at this point. Teens really do care about privacy, source credibility, and safety. And so we knew that those had to be criteria for which we made future decisions on. In terms of how they already access information about sex and relationships, consistently they were getting information from near and same age peers, Google, and porn. And then lastly, they prefer to use smartphones instead of computers to access Google and porn. And so if we had just taken what our team had envisioned up front for a solution and just went with that sex ed app in schools, we might not have gotten to the level of dissemination and engagement that we've experienced because we made some other decisions. But the 6 months that we took to do the inspiration phase, and because we had the funding and we had time to do this, was really, really informative. And so at this point, what questions do you have about the methods used in this case study so far? I might not be able to answer them all right now, but it'll be helpful for me to review them as we keep moving forward and talk about other methods later today. And then I can also follow up with those of you one-on-one.
So I guess my question, I'll go ahead and say it. It was very helpful to talk through that. So I was thinking about my current context, and it was easier in the last one to think of what I want my end users to do. When I was thinking about what other context do they do this, I was thinking, but it's individual. It's still individualized to that person. Do they do something like it? So I would probably need more time to think about that broadly, or I guess you need to go to the people to do it, not just conceptualize it. What I think, anyway, I don't know if this makes sense, but it was very clear what I want them to do because I've been working on it for a while, and what other contexts I was brainstorming, what might they do? What are examples? It's very individual. So how did you come up with the other contexts sort of as an aggregate versus individuals? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Leslie, I'm not sure I 100% understand, but I'll say something and then you can chime in. I think that first it's iterative. And so you're right, you might talk to people first, and then that might help inform what they might tell you how they want to feel through something, this experience, or what they see as what needs to be done and what they want to do. And so that is totally fine. And then the second piece, I think it's often easier to have you explain what you want people to do to other people who are not in your field, and then have them make the connections for you. So for example, I was working on a project about voting, and that'll come up later today. And when I distill it down to the most basic things that we need millennials to do in order to vote, they need to ideally commit to a date and a time to vote. And other people in the group who are not related to this project were like, oh, it's the same as setting up a romantic date. And I was like, that's not how I would have gotten there, but helpful, because when you're setting up a romantic date, you are, in fact, setting a date and time to do something. And so asking people about that experience might yield questions about how they might apply a similar process to setting up a date and time for voting.
Okay, that's great for that analogy. That's great.
Okay. And then Carmina, how did you identify, recruit people at the extremes to get their perspectives? And so this is where, once we had thought through some of our criteria for extremes, we went back and either asked for people who are already in our network, like teachers or school leaders, church organization leaders, to connect us with people who belong to those groups. Or we also went through and created screening surveys online where we directed a bunch of teens to that site, and then they would indicate if they were which of those criteria they were a part of, and then that helped us identify who we wanted to speak to. Kate, one issue I face in teaching this in class is just getting the students to have meaningful interviews with large groups of potential users. Yeah, I think that it's really tough to give students the content and the time to practice meaningfully in the format that we have in semester-long courses. And so I really do think that, like, having taken semester-long courses in qualitative methods and interviewing, that the earlier we expose young people to qualitative methods in interviewing and this kind of data collection, the better. And in terms of large groups of potential users, Kate, I will teach a new course next spring, and I think that I'm gonna have to manage expectations and limit the number of interviews. And I think I will go for quality over quantity, even though in the real world we would want people to talk with a lot of people, but probably giving people 1 or 2 interviews versus many. And then I don't know if I'll be able to address all these questions at this very moment, but Tracy, I see your question about addressing kids' biases. And then Heather, I see your private question about what we learned from observations of children and teens interacting with exhibits. Oh, for that analogous inspiration, it was helpful to watch young people and to see how many of them watched them through, like how long did it take for somebody to go to an exhibit? What did they do? Did they first read the instructions? Did they ignore the instructions and start touching things? Was it a completely individual experience? Did they invite a whole group over? Did they ask an adult to come join them? And so watching it happen generated all these questions that we then applied to thinking about our own way to increase access to comprehensive sex ed. So similarly, would we want or expect young people just to dive in? Will they read the instructions? Is it something that they would want to do as a group activity versus a singular activity? And so without having had that experience watching the young people interact with the exhibits, I don't think that we would have generated those questions. Okay, thank you. We will continue to respond. And the next section is finding and contacting users, especially now that many of us are socially distancing. And so further clarification, who are your users? So want to make sure that we're all on the same page here with the words that we are using. And so users, beneficiaries, and customers are sometimes the same, but they may sometimes be different. And so when they're the same, I create a user account with Spotify. I benefit because I am the one listening to the Spotify music, and I'm also the customer because I paid for the Spotify account. However, it's possible that you have different groups of people for each of these different categories. So users use the actual product, beneficiaries benefit, customers or payers cover the cost. And so for an example that I will offer here for Medic Mobile, it's a nonprofit organization that creates technology for community health workers in low-resourced countries so that they can connect with patients in the community and as well as the hospital systems. And so for the actual technology product, the users who are using the product are the community health workers. Beneficiaries who benefit from the product or service are probably the people who are living in the community or the doctors and nurses in the hospitals who get to see these data that are collected. And then the customers or payers are the nonprofits who are funding this work or the hospital systems who are paying for the technology. And so hoping that that's one example that'll show that it's possible that these different groups might be different people, but it might be the same. And so for right now, very quickly, it would be great for you all to share some of the ways you already interact with members who are users in your work. And instead of breaking them out into breakout groups, I would encourage you just to type them into chat and I will read them out. May reach out through email. In the past, may have made site visits, software to mail larger groups and help desks, in real life interviews, asking questions, observing, newsletter posts, Qualtrics surveys. I'm sure a couple more will come in. That's a great list. And so want to also emphasize here that many of you already connect with users in meaningful and different ways. And so that is great. So we are offering additional ways that you can think about connecting with these users, especially in a time during social distancing. Small group discussions. Okay, so wanting to turn it back to you all so that you can think through who your users are. And so I want to recruit a diverse sample based on blank and blank. Typically, we might think about factors like age, gender identity, race, ethnicity, location. And so additional factors may include experiences, behaviors, mindsets, values, and opinions. These are some of the factors we discussed on Monday too. And along those same lines, going to bring back the conversations about extremes and mainstreams. So hinging on the premise that an idea that suits extreme users well will nearly certainly work for the majority of others. And it's helpful for us to think about what typical users think, say, and do, and what extreme users think, say, and do. And in the example that I'm going to give, if I want millennials in Chapel Hill to vote more in the 2020 election compared to 2016, here are some of my reflections if I were doing this activity on my own. It's possible that I say that my typical mainstream users are millennials who have registered to vote in their home states, might have voted in one or two of the past two elections. They think or say that voting is a right and that voting is important. One side of the extremes, some criteria might be, some folks might say that my vote doesn't matter. They think elected officials don't actually do anything, have never registered to vote, and are registered to vote but have never voted. On the other side, we could have millennials who say, every vote matters. I have a personal responsibility to help increase voter turnout. Elected officials hold a lot of decision-making power. They potentially campaign for local and national candidates or volunteer to early voting polls and are active members of their local political parties' precincts. And so this was my initial reflections upon answering those guiding questions for this challenge. And so for the next 3 minutes, and I know it's very quick, but would like to at least have space for you all to start thinking about these. I'm going to ask you to go back to that Google Jamboard, and then you are going to look for the board that is yours. And so I've organized it based on the first letter of your last name. And so please follow the instructions there. And then add virtual sticky notes about what your mainstreams and extremes think, say, and do. And again, I will go back and recopy the link to the Jamboard if you've exited out of it, and encourage you to switch to 2, 3, and 4 just to figure out which one pertains to you with your last name. And then similar to the example at the top, spend a couple minutes just thinking through who your extremes and mainstreams might be and what they might say, think, or do. 30 seconds left. We have one very large Post-it on this one. Okay. Thirty seconds. All right, pause wherever you are. So this is, again, potentially a helpful graphic organizer for members of your team to start to populate so that you can think through who your extremes and mainstreams are and what they do, say, and think so that you can explicitly recruit them. I'm going to bring you all back to the slide deck. Great. So in addition to finding them, there's that next step of actually how do you contact them. And so virtual channels and environments like using your phone to text, call, or FaceTime, using online platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook groups, Twitter, Instagram Live, or other digital environments and events like webinars, classes, social support groups, online gaming sites, virtual appointments in hospitals, and YouTube are things that we should start to be considering as we are social distancing. And there are a few ways that you can think about how you actually connect. And so it's easier if you already made contact or already interact with some of the users, because you can go through and reach out directly through one or more of the virtual channels environments yourself. If you will rely on somebody like a partner or stakeholder to connect with them, it's still fine for you to initiate conversation digitally with that partner or stakeholder and be really clear about who you're looking to connect with and ask for suggestions for the best virtual channels and environments to connect with them. And then the last one, which many of us might be in, especially if we're starting new research projects right now during social distancing, is to essentially open it up so that you are sharing information and invitation through one or more of these virtual channels and environments, and inviting people to contact you if you think that they, or if they think that they fall into one of those criteria that you're looking for. And again, similar to last time, offering some example language that you can tailor to your own needs, but we want you to be as specific as possible in the information and invitation that you give. So the one that I gave was, I'd like to speak with a team between the ages 13 and 15 who has multiple social media accounts and has been in more than one romantic relationship for a project on improving access to sex ed. If you have someone who meets these criteria and who's interested, please have them text Liz by this date to learn more. And again, we have only 90 minutes in this session, and so I know that this is quick, but we will end today with a virtual inspiration methods blitz in the hopes that some of these activities are ones that you all can apply to your own work. And returning to the 7 lenses, many of us may have had professor, researcher, clinician, academic, or other university role listed when we started the day. And these lenses and titles do afford us power and privilege that we must continue to reflect on as we engage with users. So in the coming weeks and months, as we gear up for the fall workshop, we will continue to reflect on our lenses and biases and how they shape the work that we do. A few other notes, especially during social distancing, we do have a lot of power when choosing users to engage with and the extent to which we engage them. And so it might be easy to say, oh, well, during COVID, we know that many families have other things to worry about, so maybe we'll just skip that step or do less of it. And so want to make sure that we are thinking about that if that's something that we're discussing or thinking about. Second, it's really important to be clear about what you'll be doing with the data collected from these inspiration activities. We want to manage expectations and don't want to only take and have it be one direction. Third, engaging with users virtually may actually lessen some barriers. So instead of working to find time in our schedules or to figure out how to transport people from place one to place two, that's better. Others might be greater though with access to and familiarity with technology. So actively think about the users you will or will not be able to reach virtually. And then in a way to lessen perceived power differentials, we do recommend that we use first names in these digital sessions. We also encourage that you demo the technology first with examples before you ask people to do it on their own. And then to make sure it's clear how users should ask for help if they get stuck. So you can encourage them to chat in Zoom or to text you, but make sure that they know if they do get stuck, what they're supposed to be doing. So some common methods that many of you might be familiar with that IDEO includes in their design kit that you could use via Zoom or other video conferencing technology include interviews, group interviews, expert interviews. While you're doing these interviews, you can offer some conversation starters, so essentially some fill in the blank questions to seed thought. Like, I think it's a really good idea for people to get the flu shot because, and then ask people to fill in the blank for you if that's really what you care about. A guided tour so people can actually show you their context or environment through one of these technologies. You could have peers observe peers similarly using this technology, and then immerse yourself potentially in some of these experiences. Like if you wanted to originally go in person to observe a training, but now all these trainings at the site that you're hoping to learn from are remote, you can still immerse yourself by choosing to engage remotely. And then you can use Google Jamboards, the one that we've been using, Miro, which is a website that offers free educational accounts, and Mural, and they all do something similar to Google Jamboard, but maybe a little bit more souped up. And I've, in the next couple Jamboards, offered examples of how you might do the 5 whys, card sorts, photo journals, collage, and then draw it. And so in the Jamboard, I will quickly walk us through some of the examples here. So
I have a really quick question about Jamboard.
yes.
So I had been kind of looking it up in the background, and I know it's part of the G Suite if you have an enterprise, but I mean, is this essentially, do you have access to this because of an enterprise license, or is this something that anybody with a Gmail account can use? Because I would love to use this in my classes, and I wasn't sure what our access is to it.
It's a great question, and we need to further look into it. I do have
Right,
an
okay.
enterprise account. However, I think that they are doing educational accounts and also
Right,
offering
okay.
Suite perks. And so
Okay.
we will keep looking into it. But in the meantime, if that doesn't work, I do know that Miro and Mural are offering different versions that actually have more functionality. And so I would encourage you to try those too.
Great, okay, thank you.
Yes. And so for the 5 whys, you could do this in an interview setting, but you could also just as easily model it and do it virtually. And so this is where you would ask a broad question and then follow it up by asking why 5 times. And so an example from my own work, I could have asked the teen, how important is sex ed to you? They could have responded in the Jamboard, it's very important to me. And then I ask them to then ask themselves why 5 times, and then talk about it with me. And so this is one example. If you wanted a template to share with users, I just offered one. Card sort, like the way that we did it, we had physical cards printed out and cut out, but you could just as easily mimic this activity online where you would ask a question, With whom do you feel most comfortable talking about sex and relationships? Offer the cards, and then ask young people to go through and move the cards in whatever way you're hoping to learn, and then ask follow-up probes. We do recommend including this other card here so that they can go through and add anything that they think is missing from here. Photo journaling, you can ask young people to document a particular process. So ask your parents a question about puberty, document the process or experience. And so young people through photos throughout their day might offer, I laid in bed thinking about it all day and agonizing about how I would do this. I first thought about asking my dad in the car, but then I chickened out, so that didn't work. So I ultimately decided that I was more comfortable talking to my mom and only doing it by text. So that's what I did. It took her a long time to respond, which is why I had the clock there and I was nervous. And ultimately she referenced and sent me a link to this website called Amazed to learn more about my period. Similarly, collages, how do you find info about sex and relationships? If you offer something like a Jamboard, they can just copy and paste or drag images here to start conversations. And then lastly, draw it. And so you can do this in the Jamboard. You can also do it in Miro and Mural, but asking young people or your users of any kind a question. So where do you use your smartphone during the day? And so for many of the teens we talked to, we heard that it started when they woke up, they would sit in bed, they would look at it over breakfast to catch up, they would look at it on the bus ride to school, in homeroom, at lunch, and then on the way home on the bus, and then going to bed. So again, here are some illustrations of how you could use these technologies using Jamboard or other similar things. And then, because I want to make sure that we keep to time, a few quick announcements and reminders. And so our next workshop, which will focus on ideation, the art and science of brainstorming, how to foster convergent and divergent thinking, will take place on Monday from 11:30 to 1. Before Monday, we do ask that each of you identify 2 inspiration methods from the design kit posted to Sakai that you plan to try in the next few weeks. And then we also ask you to fill out the feedback survey, which about 30 of you did after the last workshop, and sign up with any office hours that you might want. And then at this point, I will start Q&A, knowing that many of you may want to drop off at 1 for other commitments. I can stay a few minutes longer, but we'll start by answering some of the questions in the chat. And so it looked like, Leslie, does it need to be IRB approved, especially if it involves patients who have had a health event? And so it depends on your research. And then again, whether you are hoping that the findings from this inspiration phase are generalizable to others who you're not directly connecting with. And so I think you will need to work this out with an IRB representative. But for the work that we were doing, we knew that we were working with a small group of teens at times for the initial phase, and we were not saying that we were going to generalize that knowledge to larger groups of teens. And so IRB let us go through and submit our questions, but it ultimately expedited our review. And so we didn't have to go further. I think we were actually exempt at that point. But with IRB applications, they are starting to see, because we've been talking to them, more and more people using these design methods and are getting used to people writing applications in phases. So submitting what you know now for the inspiration phase, telling them that there will be future work in ideation and implementation further down the line, but that's as much information as you have now. And then once you get to that next phase, submitting a modification with those additional new methods, and then doing it in phases as opposed to saying upfront, here's everything that you're going to do and here's what we're headed towards. Right. And then Stephanie, great. If you see it in your personal account suite, I will need to log out of my enterprise account and see if I can do it there. Zoom has a whiteboard, helpful. And then Anne added that the technology actually seems even more accessible or effective for those inspiration activities than in person because of the anonymity. And so I do think that that's true for some. And I also will add that it's nice that in Jamboards, you're able to then export the boards and save them. And so instead of having to sit there and take pictures or diligently note take about the order that people have written, you can focus on taking notes about why they've ranked them in this way, but it's nice that you have a saved record. Any other questions? Okay, if there aren't any whole group questions, what I can do is I can stop the recording and then hang out for another couple minutes to answer individual questions, but appreciate your time, and then I will see many of you on Monday.
Thanks, Liz.